Visit Sailrite.com for all your project supplies, tools, and instructions.
Hi, I'm Seth Grant with Sailrite, and in today's tutorial video, we're going to show you how to make this duffel bag kit that can also be converted into a backpack by simply unbuckling these straps or attaching them.
This is a do-it-yourself bag kit from Sailrite that is both a duffel bag and also a backpack. The outside shell is made from Cordura 1000D fabric, which is tough and highly water resistant. It also features adjustable straps for the backpack. This kit comes with plotted patterns, 44 in total. Save the patterns and you can make more of these bags if you like. For a truly professional look inside, the lining is made from a Nimbus Cotton Duck fabric, which is soft and supple. You'll find 6 pockets and 2 side pouches throughout the bag. 4 kit colors are available, the first being a light gray with a yellow lining insert. The second, a Pacific blue with a light gray lining insert. Thirdly, a black with a charcoal gray lining on the inside. And lastly, a forest green with a gold lining insert. This is the one we're going to show you how to build in this tutorial video. This Sailrite kit is somewhat hard to build, which will advance your skills to the next level. Purchase your kit from Sailrite, then watch Seth Grant show you each step that is required to build and sew your duffel bag backpack kit. Let's get started. Our first step is patterning the main body panels out of Cordura 1000D fabric.
This is the pattern that you're going to get from Sailrite, and the first thing we're going to do here is we'll cut out right between 5A and 10B to separate the body from the lining fabric. So right below the lining fabrics, you'll see there's 6B, 19A, and 19B, and we're going to cut these out to separate them from all the other panels. These are our foam reinforcements, so these are for the straps, and this is for the bottom of the bag. So this is Cordura Classic, which is 1000 denier, and it does have a right side and a wrong side. The wrong side has a urethane coating, so you want to make sure the right side is always up. This is the width of our fabric, and we want to put our pattern on so it's down the running length. Now we're just going to put pins in each one of our panels. I like to use 2 pins in all of the rectangular shaped panels. I know this has rounded ends, but it's rectangular shaped. And then sometimes on these skinnier ones, I'll use 4 pins just because it can be difficult to get it to stay still when you're cutting it out. So I'm going to continue pinning all of the panels. I'll put 4 in this one and then 2 in most of the others. Now we're going to cut out all of the panels on the external black lines. So we won't cut on any of these lines that are just running into it. Those are just marks for centering or webbing and stuff like that. For panel 15A and 16A, we're going to cut around these rectangles. We won't cut the lines that are running through our numbers and letters because this is a panel that needs to be split for a zipper later. There's no reason for you to use a hot knife when cutting this out because all of the edges will be concealed, and Cordura really doesn't unravel much because it has a coating on it. So all of our pieces are cut out on the table, and we're going to take them and set them aside. We are going to do them in numerical order if that makes it easier for you when you're stacking.
In this chapter, we'll pattern the Nimbus lining and the padding.
This fabric is called Nimbus. It's a cotton fabric, and we're going to be using it for the lining. We'll do the same thing with the lining fabric. Our fabric is, the running length is across the table, and then we also will put our pattern down the running length, so it all fits. Again, you'll see we have 15B and 16B that have a line running through the numbers and letters, and we're not going to cut on that line. We're just going to cut around it as a rectangle, and that's for our zipper plaque. Okay, and now we're going to pin each panel just like we did with the Cordura. Same process with the lining. We'll cut on all the external lines except for the 15B and 16B. So once we cut all these out, we'll show you what is next. We've now cut out all of our lining panels, and we're going to do the same thing, stacking them in numerical order. You might notice that there's a few numbers missing here, and that's just because some of the pieces that are pockets, don't necessarily have a lining fabric because you'll never see the inside of them.
6B and 19A and B are pinned to the closed cell foam that's provided in the kit, and we'll cut those out. On the side of the bag is a zippered pocket. We'll be building that assembly next.
So we're going to start with panel 1, and we're going to use our clear acrylic ruler and place it on the 2 dashed lines at the top and strike a line across it with a Sharpie. And then we're going to cut this out with a pair of scissors. And this will be for our zipper on the front pocket, the outside of the bag. And if you want to keep these to make a second bag, you can. So I would just, if I was going to keep them, I would probably take a pin or tape and I would tape them or pin them together so you don't lose them. So I'm going to turn these 2 panels over so that the wrong side is facing up, or the side with the urethane coating. And I'm going to put basting tape right across that top of the piece, right where we cut. And then this one, I'm going to put it across both of the long edges, as close to the raw edge as possible. Okay, I'll peel off the transfer paper, and then I'm going to fold it to approximately a 1/2 inch. You could also mark it and fold so it's more accurate, but it'll be close enough as long as I make sure it's straight when I'm finished. So that's nice right there. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing with this one. Peel off the transfer tape, fold it to a 1/2 inch, all the way across, and repeat this process on this side. Basting tape doesn't like to stick to Cordura too much, so I'm going to use the Sailrite canvas patterning ruler and press both of the basted sides down just so they stay in place. Then I'm going to take my zipper and I'm going to cut a piece that's about a 1/2 inch longer on both sides and place basting tape on the back side, not the side with the teeth, which you'd normally do, but on the back side of the zipper because we're using reverse sliders. And you want to get this basting tape as close to the edge of the zipper as possible and do it to both sides of the zipper. We're going to split the zipper in half and peel off the transfer paper. We're going to baste this as evenly as possible with about a 1/2 inch excess on each side. Could be a little less, could be a little bit more, to our piece. And you don't want it, you want it to be straight on this and have about the same amount of the zipper sewing, and you don't want to have the basting tape show on the top. And we'll do the same thing up here. Turn it over, make sure they're about the same, and if they're not, you can make adjustments because you used basting tape. So I can just adjust it a little bit so that they're about the same amount of the zipper is showing. We're sewing in approximately a 4mm stitch length, and I'm going to sew with this outside of this foot up against the teeth on the zipper, and my needle will be in the center position. So I'm going to hold my trailers, do a little bit of reversing at the beginning, and then just follow that zipper all the way down the length of this pocket. Then when I get to the end, I'm going to do some reversing there as well. Okay. And we'll do the exact same thing with the little guy right here.
A heavy-duty sewing machine is really required for this type of duffel because a lot of the thicknesses get very thick as we continue to build upon them.
Now we're back at the table and we're going to trim off the excess zipper so that they're flush on all of them. And this really just makes it super easy to get the zipper slider on evenly. This is a reverse tab slider, so you'll notice the zipper is upside down, and we're going to feed it on there with it upside down so that the tab is on the top. And then we're going to zip it all the way through. So as soon as I get this on here, I'll zip it all the way through, and then I'm going to put it on again, making sure the sides are even. You see how it's even here? The green fabric, our Cordura, is even at the top. That's very important. Otherwise, you could sew the pocket in a little bit crooked. So now I'll feed it on here again. There we go. This is panel 2A and 3A, and we're going to take our scribe ball and mark at all of these Sharpie marks on the panel, and this is for where the webbing goes. And then this right here is for the pocket. And then this one up here is for the top of the webbing. So we'll mark all those and then show you what's next. So I need to turn panel 3A around so that it's facing this way, because this is where I'm marked for the bottom of the webbing. So that means that when I put this on, I'm going to take this pattern off, put the pocket on even between these two. So that means when I put this on, you will have the marks at the bottom. So you need to make sure that they're at the bottom. So I'm going to baste this together. Okay, put your basting tape on. I'm just going to baste over the pocket. It should hold it in place. Baste these so that they're even on the outside and the bottom edge right there, with outside surfaces facing each other. It's very important that you always have the outside surfaces facing each other. Otherwise, you're going to have a urethane coating on the outside of your bag, which is not very attractive. We're going to put the Deluxe Magnetic Sewing Guide right up against the outside edge of the foot because we're going to use a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So for us, that's a 3/8 inch seam allowance. We will put our foot down, hold our trailers, do a little reversing here at the beginning, and then just sew all the way down the length of this panel and do some reversing at the end. Okay, now we're going to top stitch it, and we want to have our seam allowance down towards the smaller panel, which is down towards the bottom of the bag. So I'm going to remove our magnetic sewing guide. I'm going to put the fabric in with the edge of the seam right against the outside of my inside foot right here. Put my foot down and then sew my top stitch. A little bit of reversing and then just sew all the way down. Make sure you're sewing through your seam allowance below, and also don't sew too fast because this stitch will be visible on the outside of the bag. And if you have the new Worker Bee Power Pack, you can actually turn it down to where you're sewing super slow so that you are less likely to make a mistake. And I have the pedal to the floor right now, and this is as fast as the machine's sewing. So the Worker Bee is really nice when you're trying to do precise work like this. With our top stitch complete, now we're going to come over here and sew this hem down on the top of our pocket. So I'm just going to position the outside of my foot up against this edge and sew across it. And I will do a little bit of reversing at the beginning and the end, even though it's going to be sewn into our webbing later on.
In this chapter, we'll be creating the duffel handles and the wrap that secures the handles together.
The kit comes with two types of webbing. We're about to make the handles for the outside, and you want to use the thicker webbing. It has a rougher feel, not the thinner webbing. This is for the backpack shoulder straps. Okay, and we're going to measure and cut this to 45 inches in length. So 45 inches is right there. And I'll use the Sailrite Edge cordless hot knife. We also have a corded version, but I prefer to use the cordless. And I'll cut my webbing. And then this end also needs sealed. So you can see this end is free, so I'm going to seal it. I mean, it doesn't really need sealed because it's going to be hidden, but it's easier to work with if it's not fraying all over the place. Okay, and I'll cut a second one to the same length for the other side of the bag. Now we're going to find the center of this, so we'll just fold this in half, push the two ends together, and then we'll mark it. Okay, and we'll do the same thing with this other one. Okay, I'm going to take piece 24 and 25, and I'm going to put it on top so that it's centered right here. And then I'm going to take my scribble again and mark the outside edges. And we'll compress this so that we can put the handle on the straps. And I'll do the same thing with this one right here. Just line up the centers there and mark it. Okay. Now I'm going to take some basting tape and put it down one side between the white marks. And I don't want to go all the way because then I'll go past my line. So I'll just stop a little bit short. Same thing on the other side. Peel off the transfer paper. And I'll fold this in half so that the ends are even.
I don't know, probably not.
Now I'm going to take a pen and I'm going to run it through the webbing right at where the white marks are. So I'll look below to see where the white mark is. And then I'll run my pen through there. And this signifies where I stop sewing. If I mark it with the white pencil, I could see it in the completed project. Okay, I'm going to put it under the foot. It's a little thick here, so it takes a little bit of adjustment. And I'll start right at that first pin, lower my foot, and I'm gonna put the outside of the inside foot along the edge of the webbing. Oh, I'm gonna turn my worker bee back up. I'm gonna do some reversing here at the beginning, and then just sew all the way across that webbing and do some reversing at the end. Remember, I'm stopping at the pins. And I'll repeat this process with the other strap. So we have panels 24 and 25, and we're going to take off the patterns and flip them over. So we have the back sides facing up. And then we're going to baste, just simple basting. We don't have to baste all the way out the edges around the outsides. So I'll baste these two together with the wrong sides facing one another as evenly as possible. Looks like it might be cut better for this direction. Right there. Okay, and now I'm going to take it over to the sewing machine and bind around the outside edge. So you can do this in straight stitch, but I'm going to go into zigzag just because it makes it a little easier. So I'm going to reduce my stitch length to about 3 millimeters because it's easier to go around curves. So I'm going to start feeding this in there in the center. So I'll put it in and I'm going to put my foot down. And then I'm just going to start sewing around. I want to make sure that I'm feeding the panel in here at the exiting point of the binder. I'm not paying attention up here, I'm actually looking at the end. Okay, and I'll keep sewing around this corner, and I really got to push it in there at this corner or else I'm not going to get it in there properly. Okay, here's the next corner. And you can go slow at these corners too if you're having trouble. It's just important that you get it all the way pushed up in there. You just got to make sure you're paying attention to that exiting point. It's the most important part. Feed it in there nicely. Okay, one more corner and then we're at the end here. Yeah, when we come to the end here, we're going to shove this in there really hard so that we make sure they cross over one another. And then we're going to do some reversing. And there we go. There's our completed piece. I'm going to trim it right up here close to the stitches, and then when I take it to the table, I'll use a hot knife to seal those ends. Now I'm going to use the hot knife to seal the end, and I'm going to be very careful because I don't want to burn the other part of the binding. So I'll just touch it real softly there, and I'll do the same thing to this side. So now that our handle's complete, we're going to take one of the webbing straps and center the folded over part we've sewn earlier in the center of it. It doesn't have to be perfectly centered. Like I'm going to try to cover up this area right here a little bit, and then we're going to take it to the machine and sew a zigzag straight across it. And we're going to roll our balance wheel around a little bit just to get it under there. And I'm going to start just inside of the binding. So I won't actually sew over the binding. I'll sew just past it. And I'm going to do some reversing here at the beginning. And then just sew down the length. Get it perfectly straight and do some reversing at the end. And we're only going to do this, we only do this on one of the straps. The other strap will stay the way it is.
Next up, we'll sew those handles to the sides of the bag assembly.
So now we're going to take our webbing handle and put it on the bag, and obviously we have our match-up marks for the top where you stop sewing and the bottom where you start. So this allows you to get it evenly, but we want to make sure that it is all running the same direction. So if I look at this edge and follow it all the way around the perimeter, you'll notice it's straight all the way around. So if I had reversed this, I'll actually have put a twist in my handle, and it's important that we don't do that. We find that it's better to staple this in place than use basting tape, so I'm going to go ahead and just put a staple here at the bottom of this one. And the same thing over here, making sure they're within our marks. Run it in there, make sure it's on that mark, as flat as possible, and then just put a staple in. And I'll do the same thing with this one. And we want to make sure the staple is not on this line here at the top because we do have to sew up to that point. So I'll put it here in the middle because we're going to sew down both of the long edges. One more thing, before you start sewing, it's a good idea to take a pen and put a pin in right where you're going to stop And I don't really put it that far in because I have to sew over this area, but it's just a good guide. So I'll know exactly where to stop sewing. Okay, we have our needle to the right, and we're gonna sew right along these outside edges using the outside edge of the inner foot as our guide. So I'll just do a little bit of reversing down here at the bottom. And then I'll just sew down the length of the webbing all the way up to our the pin we put in place, and then I'll sew across and back down the other side. When I come up here to the top, I'm gonna stop at my pin with my needle buried, lift the foot, rotate it, and I am gonna do about 3 stitches in reverse right here. I'll just remove the pin at this point because I can sew straight across. So 1, back, and then this is my 3rd. So back was 2, this is 3. I'm gonna bury the needle close enough to the edge that I think I'm gonna make the turn so I have it right on the outside of the foot. Rotate the fabric. Let me get this so you can see. Foot down and sew down this side. Same process. And we'll repeat the same process with this, this piece on the other side. Now we have patterns 4A and 5A, and we're gonna mark these lines like we did on the previous panel for the webbing, and then remove the patterns. So this panel has the same process as this previous one did. So we're gonna base these 2 panels together with the outside surfaces facing one another, sew them together, and then do our top stitch. So we're not gonna show it.
Here it is after sewing.
So I'm about to staple my webbing onto the other side of the bag, and I wanna make sure that the twist or the direction of the webbing is the same. So what I'm gonna do is, you'll look here, I'm gonna follow this outside edge, and you see this outside edge goes up, and if you look over here, the outside edge goes up. That means I'm actually in the same position. And now I'm gonna staple it and then sew it, just like I did this one.
We're going to skip ahead, not showing how to sew this because it's done in exactly the same way as the other side. To give the inside of the bag a finished look, we'll be adding lining to the sides next.
So now we have pattern 2B and 3B and 4B and 5B, and these are the lining fabrics for both sides of our bag. So we've removed these patterns, okay? And obviously the larger one goes, which is the 4B and 5B goes on this side, and the smaller one goes on this side. And we are going to baste around the perimeter of these panels and baste the lining fabrics to them. So all the way around the perimeter. And we're not going to break our basting tape, so we're just going to hold our finger here at the corner and turn, which makes it easier when you're peeling the transfer paper off because you don't have to peel off multiple segments. So put your finger, turn it. Pretty easy. Okay, now we're going to peel off the transfer paper, revealing the glue. And I did use the Sailrite canvas patterning ruler to make sure it stayed in place. I'm going to go all the way around the perimeter. And then we'll baste this evenly on top of this panel. And there is no right side or wrong side to Nimbus, so I can put either side on top of this panel and it won't matter. And sometimes the lining fabric goes a little over the edge, which is totally fine because it's all going to be sewn into a seam and then have binding on it, so you'll never even be able to tell, so it doesn't matter. So you'll see it's a little bit over. And there we go, and we'll repeat the same process with this panel. If you find that the double-sided tape isn't sticking exceptionally well to the urethane coating on the Cordura, you could pin it or staple them together if that's easier for you.
Let's now assemble the main bag body.
Now we have panels 6A, 6B, and 6C, and we're going to remove all of the patterning material. So we're going to take the Cordura and flip it over so that the wrong side is facing up, and then put basting tape all the way around the perimeter. And then we're going to take our foam, or our reinforcement padding, and center it in the panel, and then take our lining fabric and baste it evenly around the perimeter. And this will be our reinforcement for the bag bottom to give it a little stiffness. Now we've placed basting tape down the long side of our bottom panel with the reinforcing foam, and we can take either side of the bag, make sure right side, outside surfaces are facing one another. See here, I have the bottom of the webbing straps, and baste it along this edge so that it's even at the ends. And then we'll take it over to the sewing machine and we'll sew 3/8 inch from the edge. We're going to place the Sailrite Deluxe Magnetic Sewing Guide right next to the foot and then sew across this, doing a little bit of reversing at the beginning and the end. And we want our needle to be in the center position. So this is our extra Cordura material that we set aside earlier, and here's our piece. And you'll notice we're going to cut 1-inch strips for binding on the bag, and we need something that's as long as this edge, so I'm just going to cut it from this strip right here. So I'll cut two 1-inch strips because I need one for this side as well. So the reason that we're making our own binding is because there's a lot of thickness issues in this bag, areas where we're going to go through 8 layers or so, and we don't want to have the extra fold from pre-done binding. So we're going to make our own strips, and this is not traditional. You may be asking yourself, why are we not cutting it out of the Nimbus or the lining fabric to match the color? And that's because Nimbus will unravel like nobody's business, and we don't want it to unravel since we're not having a folded over edge. And it'll also burn if we were to cut it with a hot knife. Feed our binding we cut into the binder, and you may need to use a sharp object like a screwdriver or a seam ripper to push it through, just because it could be a little bigger than the 1-inch. Okay. If you have any areas that are sticking out like this webbing here, we're going to trim it off with a pair of scissors because it's going to make it impossible for our binding to cover our stitch, which is the goal of this. So we want the binding to cover the stitch. So now we're going to feed it in. You're really going to have to push this in there because the stitch is going to be right at the outside edge of our 1-inch strip we cut. Okay, no reason to do any reversing at the end because we're going to sew this into the bag in a later step. So I'm going to push it in there really hard. Make sure we're covering our previous stitch, and I'll do this all the way down the length. Our binding is now sewn in place, so it's time to do a top stitch. So we're going to fold this bottom piece over, and we want the binding to go towards the bottom of the bag. So we're going to sew our top stitch right along this edge. We're sewing a top stitch, and we're sewing through that binding we just put on the underside here. So some reversing at the beginning, and just sew all the way across the bag, making sure that we're splaying it out so it's nice and tight. So I'll bury my needle every few inches and make sure I'm pulling on it so that it looks nice and tight.
When we're filming these projects, using the light that's incorporated in with the UltraFeed sewing machine interferes with our filming, but the worker bee integrated LED light that comes with the Sailrite UltraFeed sewing machines is phenomenal. Here you can see we have it turned on. I would always have it on if I were not filming.
So now that our pieces are sewn together, we're going to trim off the end of the binding, and then we're also going to trim off this little bit of lining fabric that's showing up out here. Okay, now we're going to put the other side on the bag, and it's the same process. We're going to baste it, baste these two pieces together, sew them together, bind them, and then do a top stitch. So as long as we get our outside surfaces facing one another, process is the exact same.
We'll not show that whole process, but here we are sewing the top stitch for that panel. Let's move on. At the top of the duffel is a zippered flap opening. We'll be creating that now.
Okay, we have panel 7A and 7B, and 7B is actually just a pattern, so we actually aren't going to use the fabric here, but it's easier to put it into the lining fabric and just cut it out because it's wasted material anyway. So we'll remove both of these. So this is the underside of the Cordura, and I've taken 7A and placed it back on top. And I'm going to mark right here at this center mark right here so that I can put my 7B panel that's a pattern panel on top to mark for my zipper. So I'll mark this here. Okay. And then this panel will go directly on top right there in the center, and I'll take the scriball pencil, and I'll just mark dashed lines all the way around the perimeter of this panel. And this is where I will baste my zipper down.
We are marking on the side with the urethane coating, so the back side.
So we're going to set this panel aside for a second here, and we're going to work on 8A and 8B. So we're going to take our pencil and mark these two spots so we can strike a line across. And this will just make it easier to have an accurate hem, because this panel is a little bit more important for accuracy. And we'll do the same thing with this one right here. And now we'll remove the patterns. One more thing, before we remove this pattern, we're going to mark this bottom center just to make it easier to match up with this center over here, even though you have a dashed line where it goes anyway. Okay, and remove the patterns. And now we'll use our scriball and we'll strike a line all the way across on top of the, okay, and this is where we'll create our hems. So I'm going to put basting tape on these two, right up against the edge. We're going to remove the basting tape, or the transfer paper, excuse me, and baste to that line on both of these panels. Now we're going to cut a zipper for this, and we're going to cut it a little bit long, as we usually do, and put our basting tape on both sides of the back. So not with the teeth facing up, but with the teeth facing down. Just like we did for that front pocket, because we're still using reverse sliders on everything for this bag. So we've run basting tape down both sides of the back side of the zipper, so not the side with the teeth. And we're going to flip these over, and we're going to baste it down so that the folded edge is just past where the basting tape is placed. So we won't see any basting tape, and we can get a nice stitch really close to that folded edge. And we'll do the same thing with this piece. But I do want to make sure that when I'm putting this piece on, I'm following the curve. See how it's a curve? The curve of the top of this zippered pocket, so that I get a nice look. Otherwise it could look a little odd. Okay? So now we're gonna place this panel on top using the dash marks as our guide all the way around, and position it so it's centered. And then we're going to trim off this bottom edge. And the reason we leave this bottom edge is because if you get your zipper in a different location, we want to have enough fabric to make sure that you can finish your pocket. So we'll just even it out here at the edge and strike a line across and trim that piece away. So now we're going to sew this piece in place. So we have the outside of our foot positioned right up against those teeth and our needle in the left position. So I'm going to do a little bit of reversing here at the beginning. And then sew down that, just guiding it right alongside those teeth. Okay, and we'll come to the end here and do a little bit of reversing. And then we'll do the same thing, heading back this direction. Do a little bit of reversing and sew down the length. So I'm going to trim this, and I'll just trim off that dog ear as well. So now I'm going to put 2 sliders onto this, and remember the zippers are reversed, so your tab will always be up, even though your teeth are down. And we'll get them on there. So we want to get them on there evenly, otherwise we're going to have to redo it. Just get it on there. There we go. Now we're going to apply basting tape right up against that line we struck earlier, all the way around the back side of this top panel. And then we'll place this panel on here with it centered, but all you have to do to make sure it's centered is follow your white line you struck earlier. So as long, you just really want it to sit flat. So as long as it's sitting flat, you're in good shape. Now we're gonna put basting tape on the zipper on the top, up with the teeth facing up, down the edge, with enough that we can go around the perimeter of this. So I'll just do some extra because I'm going to have to use the zippers again, and I can always just cut it and then use the basting tape for the next part. So I will baste this zipper on with the teeth facing downward or the wrong side facing up towards me around this perimeter. And I want to follow that white line, not the lining fabric. So making sure that I'm following where the white line was is more important. Okay. And now I'm at the end, so I can trim my zipper off so that it's flush with the edge. Okay, so now that our zipper is basted down, we're going to remove the second half of the zipper because we need to attach a facing strip all the way around this perimeter, and it's harder to do if the zipper feels stiff. So we want the zipper to lay flat. So to make this next part a little easier, I removed the other side of the zipper for this piece, and I've set it aside. And now I have panel number 9, and I'm going to remove all of the pins and take the pattern off. And then I'm going to be basting this on here like so. So if you look at the outside surface is going to face this, and I'm going to baste it all the way along this edge. So I'm going to take it, flip it upright, and put basting tape along this inside edge. So we're going to peel off the transfer paper, and then we're going to take a pair of scissors, and we're going to cut little slits around these curves. And we don't want these slits to go farther than, I've been going about 1/4 inch because sometimes it's hard to sew consistently around these tight corners. And we'll do the same thing over here on this side. And I'm going to fold over this strip, the facing strip, just a little bit. It's like, what is this, a little more than 1/4 inch maybe? And we're going to continue basting around the perimeter of this facing panel. And we already cut those slits in the corners so they lay flat. And we'll just go all the way around the perimeter. So now we're going to use the Sailrite canvas patterning ruler to flatten out the hems all the way around the perimeter. We want to get it as flat as possible because we're going to baste it down, and then we have to sew around it. And if it's sticking up, it's harder to sew. And now we're going to take our basting tape and we're going to apply it right to that edge that we hemmed all the way around this piece. Once again, I'm going to use the Sailrite canvas patterning ruler to make sure the basting tape stays in place. And then I'm going to remove the transfer paper. And I'll grab my top panel with the pocket on it. Okay, so we're going to start here in the center. And see, I'm going to make sure these are even on the outside edges. And then I'm going to baste this down. And you see there's a lot of extra fabric here. That's okay, we're going to end up trimming it later. And we're going to baste it around the perimeter of the zipper. My goal is to get this to lay as flat as possible. And then my secondary goal, the zipper is even as I possibly can get it, so that I have an even amount of zipper showing. So we're going to sew this piece with the zipper teeth right against the outside of the foot. And we're going to have our needle in the left position so that we can get as close to this folded edge as possible so you won't see any basting tape. Okay, and then we're just going to do a straight stitch all the way around it. We'll do a little bit of reversing here at the beginning, even though we're going to be sewing through it again later on. So we'll sew all the way around this flap like this. At this corner, we're going to slow down, and it's great to have the worker be power packed so you can actually just slow the speed of the machine down, because we want to be precise here because this stitch will show up on the top of the bag. So it's a pretty predominant stitch. So we'll just slowly go around this curved area. So we're back at the table, and we're going to trim all this excess off of the top plate before we put binding on it. So we'll just take our scissors and trim around. Now we're going to lift up the flap, and we're going to place basting tape on the inside of this flap all the way around it. And we'll baste it down so that we can get rid of all these puckers you can see at the corner right here. So we can actually use the basting tape to help us work them out. Now we're going to peel off the transfer paper all the way around the perimeter. And we're going to baste these down as flat as we possibly can. So I'm going to try to pull all of the wrinkles out if possible. You will occasionally have a wrinkle just because you're taking more fabric around a curve, but you want to get rid of as much as you can. That's looking pretty good. This is our prefabricated binding that comes in the kit, and we use this for all of the external bindings on the bag. So you'll have enough of this to do the straps, the handle, and the top flap of the bag. And we're going to use a zigzag stitch for this, the top of this bag, and we're going to shorten our stitch length because it's a little easier to sew around these curves, and it also gives it a nice look. So we have our foot down, and we're just going to start feeding it in there, paying attention to the exiting point of the binder. Hold our trailers, and off we go. And we're going to turn the worker bee back up to about half speed, just so it doesn't take as long. Then when you get to the corner, if it gets a little off, make sure you slow down, but it should be pretty easy because this is a rather gradual corner. So just roll it around, keep feeding it in there, then keep going, and go all the way to the other side and do a little bit of reversing. Okay, this is panel 10A, and before we put the zipper on, we're going to mark all of these dash lines for where the buckles will be attached to the bag. So we'll mark, this is the center, so this will be for the shoulder strap. So we've removed, this is panel 10B, we've already removed the patterning material, and we will flip over panel 10A, which is the one we just made the marks for the buckles on, and we will put basting tape around all the way around the perimeter and the inside edge. And then peel off the transfer paper. And now we'll take the lining fabric and we will baste it to the top of our panel. If there is any fabric sticking over the edge, just take your scissors and trim it off. So we're going to take the other half of the zipper that we used for this top flap and put it around this inside edge right here. So I'm going to put basting tape all the way around the inside edge of this piece. And then we're going to baste this down with the teeth facing up, so up towards you. And the flange obviously has to be is towards the inside. We'll just go all the way around the inside edge like this. It's normal to have a few little wrinkles at the corner, just because obviously there's extra fabric and you're trying to shrink it. So I'm going to sew on this zipper, and I have my needle in the left position, and I'm going to put the teeth right up against the outside of this foot and sew around this piece, doing a little bit of reversing at the beginning. And then just all I got to do is feed it on there and make sure it's up against the teeth. Pretty easy. When I get to these spots that are a little bit curved, you can actually almost straighten this piece because the curve's so gradual, and just sew it almost as a straight piece, which makes it a lot easier. So we cut another strip of our Cordura to 1 inch and obviously fed it in with the urethane side facing in towards the inside of the binding, outside facing towards the throat of the sewing machine. And we are going to take it and we are going to bind this inside edge of our zipper. And there's no reason to do reversing at the beginning because you're going to sew this into the bag later, so it doesn't matter. We are using a zigzag stitch here, but a straight stitch would work as well. So now we'll take our sliders and we'll install one slider on each one of these pieces to get it all zipped together. And this will have 2 sliders on it, so we will install one on the other end as well. And we want to make sure that our fabric is even when we install these sliders. So you see how the fabric is even? And we'll zip it around and make sure that everything is uniform. But I'm going to zip to the middle, take my second slider, and put this slider on this end. Here's what the panel looks like when it's zipped together, and I'm going to pull on these 2 sides to make sure it looks square. If it didn't look square, I would take it off and restart the zippers so that it looks uniform and even across the top. So I want this front edge to look nice and square. Okay, and then here's our zipper. Looks really nice. If you open it up, you'll see our bound edge in here, and then there's the pocket.
Next up, we'll be sewing the buckles and the D-rings to the body of the bag.
This is our 1-inch nylon webbing, and we're going to cut 4 3-inch strips of this webbing, and these are going to be used for the buckles, and then the I think they're D-rings that could hold a shoulder strap if you're going to make one. This is our 1.5-inch nylon webbing, and we're going to cut 2 3-inch pieces off of it. So we took one of our 3-inch pieces along with the female side of the buckle, and we're going to be sewing this onto the bag right here. But we want to make sure that we get it on the right side. So if you look at this side, the marks are closer together and there's a much wider distance, and that is for the 1-inch webbing, whereas this side, they're closer together. They're 1.5 inches and everything's closer together. So this is for the 1.5-inch webbing. Okay, so we're going to place our webbing on here, and we want to have about a 1/2 inch of webbing sticking out over the edge, and then we're going to staple it in place with a 1/2 inch over the edge. And that we're going to cut that 1/2 inch off later, but it's easier to position if you have a bigger tail. Okay, and we're going to put a second one on in the same manner right here. There is a right side and a wrong side to these buckles, so you want the down side to be facing towards the Cordura or your fabric. If it's facing up, it will still work, but it will be backwards. So now we have a D-ring, and we're gonna do the exact same thing with the D-ring, just staple it in place with a 1/2 inch between the fabric and the outside of the webbing. So these are our 1-inch buckles with our 1-inch webbing, and we're gonna do the same thing on this side. We'll center these on those marks. So you see the 2 marks, it goes between the 2, 1/2 inch over the edge, and we'll staple it in place. D-ring, centering mark, so we put it in the center of that mark, and then staple this on as well. Then last buckle. Remember, it has a right side and a wrong side. Right side has to face up. So we're gonna put a Sailrite tag on. The kit will come with 2. You could put it anywhere you want. A lot of people like to put it underneath these webbing straps over here, but we're gonna put ours on the top of the bag right here. And this tag just shows the world that you did it yourself, because Sailrite is a DIY company. So just staple it in place, and we're ready to sew. So we're gonna sew this is just a tacking stitch, so we're gonna sew it right up against the outside edge. I have the outside of the fabric up against the outside of the inside foot, and we'll just sew through this one. We don't need to reverse through the Sailrite tag because there's gonna be a lot more stitches through it, but we will be reversing heavily through the webbing since there's pull on it. So we'll just keep sewing along this edge, sew into the webbing, and then I'm just gonna back tack over the webbing a few times, making sure we keep it straight. So that's 3, 4, 5, and now we're gonna go on to the next one and do the same thing. So we're gonna do the same thing for all of the webbings on here, including the ones on this side, and then we'll show you what's next. Okay, now they're all sewn in place, so we're gonna remove the staples from each one of them, and then we're gonna take our hot knife, and we're going to hot knife them so that they are flush with that edge. So just trim every single one just like that.
Next, we'll baste and sew the zipper flap top to the body.
So we have the main body of the bag back on the table, and we are going to work on the side opposite of the zippered pocket. So this is the back side of the bag, and we're going to put basting tape down this back edge. And we'll take the top of the bag with the flaps, and we're gonna have to splay it out so it stretches properly. And we're gonna, so outside surfaces face each other, and notice this is the back of the flap is gonna face down on top of the main body. And we're gonna baste it so that it's pulled nice and tight across. So after we finish basting this on, we're actually just gonna staple these ends so that they're all the way out here, and then probably put a few staples in the center just so it doesn't move around. And now I'm gonna trim it so that all of the sides are flush, because we're gonna be binding this edge, so it's important that it's flush, because you don't want anything sticking out when you bind it. So yeah, looks like we're good right there. So now we're gonna go to the sewing machine. We're gonna sew this with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, just like everything else. So we'll put our magnetic guide right up against the foot. And I'm gonna make sure that this piece is properly positioned. It's very important that it's in the right place. And then I'm just gonna sew all the way across. So I'll get my foot down here, do a little bit of reversing here at the beginning. And there is a buckle here, really close to this edge. So you might have to put your hand underneath and push that buckle to the side, like I just did, or else it's gonna interfere with your foot. Okay, and here we go. Okay, a little bit of reversing. Then just the same process as usual. This is a thicker spot, so you're gonna wanna go slow, and sometimes it's not even a bad idea to just walk the foot up, because you're going through maybe six layers there. Then just sew all the way across. And then you're gonna wanna make sure that your binding is down when you sew over this next side so that it matches the other side. You'd never want to sew it like this. Next, we're going to be binding this edge, but first we're going to want to remove all of the staples that we put in. So we're once again using our Cordura cut into a strip. If you need to cut more, go for it. We had enough from our last piece, and we're going to feed it into the binder and bind this edge. So we're going to sew this binding onto this edge, and we're going to use a straight stitch because the zigzag might go over our stitches, and then you'd see it in the top of the bag. So same process as we've done for all the other pieces we bound. Just sew down the edge. And there is a thick portion here. So you're really going to have to make sure you get that forced in there. And sometimes you even have to take the binder and pull it back. But we made it through just fine, so we'll keep going. Okay, once again, we're coming up on that really thick area with the other binding. So we'll have to force it through there, and you're probably not going to cover your stitches all the way here, but you got to do your absolute best. Okay, I'm going to walk it over this because it's getting a little stuck, then continue to sew. Then at the end, we'll do a little reversing. So we finished sewing our binding, and now we're going to put a top stitch in. So we're going to roll over the top, and then we want our binding to go towards the straps or the bottom of the bag. We do not want to sew our binding into the top. So we'll push it over that direction, and then sew our top stitch just like we did on the other side. You will probably have to roll, well, you will definitely have to roll up your fabric if you're using an ultra feed, but you'll probably have to roll it up, okay? And then we're going to put the outside of our inside foot right against that edge and pull these two pieces apart. We're going to want to sew this slowly, so I'm going to turn the worker bee power pack down to its slowest speed because everyone's going to see the stitch. Okay, I'll do a little bit of reversing here at the beginning, and then I will just sew slowly, guiding my edge. This is a very thick portion of the bag right here, so make sure you're sewing slowly. You're sewing through a zipper and binding and a couple layers of fabric. Ultra Feed handles it with ease. And it looks like I'm stuck, a little bit stuck, so I'm actually going to walk it by hand over the zipper. So I can feel the zipper, it's right here where my finger is. And I'll just keep walking it until I'm on the other side. There, that's the thickest part. Okay, and now I'm past it, so I should be able to sew. Okay, continue to stretch, pull the fabrics apart so you don't get any wrinkles. And take your time with this stitch.
In this short chapter, we'll be sewing the main body assembly together to form a circle.
So here's the main body of the bag, and now we're just going to take some basting tape and run it along this front edge here to sew the body together. We want it to sit flat, so I'm going to keep flattening it out as I go. And then as outside surfaces face one another, we'll move this over here and we will baste this down evenly down the length of the two panels. And these webbing straps will be very close to the edge, so we do need to push these back because obviously we're not going to want to sew through them. I'm going to take the Deluxe Magnetic Sewing Guide and place it right next to the outside of our foot because we're doing a 3/8 inch stitch as we did for the rest of the bag. All I'm going to do is a little bit of reversing here at the beginning and then sew all the way down the length of this panel, and then we're going to bind it. We are going to come up to these webbing straps, so I'm going to bury my needle when I get close. I think it's right there. So I'll bury my needle and I'm just going to make sure it's pushed back all the way because it can get in the way and make it hard to sew. So obviously, so you can see it's pushing it away. So I'll just pull it closer over there and then just keep going. We cut more of our 1-inch Cordura for our binding, and obviously we have it in there so that the inside surface is facing this way, and we're just going to sew it on this edge. And we are not going to top stitch this piece. We're just going to put binding on it.
At the two ends of the bag are end pouches. We're going to work with the top plates first.
So we have 11A, 12A, 11B, and 12B, and we're going to remove all of the patterning material. I'm going to flip over the two Cordura panels so that the wrong side, the side with the urethane, is facing up. And then I'm going to apply basting tape around the outside of these panels and baste this lining fabric right on top, just like that.
These are the end panels or side pouch panels, and you'll notice here there's a handle at the top, but on the opposite bottom side, if the bag were standing upright, there is no handle. So we'll handle these exactly in the same manner, except for one will include this handle and the other one will not. So we'll baste it together, the second one, in slightly a different manner. First, we'll work with that webbing piece for the handle.
So this is more of our poly cotton webbing, and we're going to mark, this is a 14-inch strip that we've cut with the hot knife. We're going to mark it in the center at 7 inches, and then we will mark 2 inches either direction. So 2 inches this way and 2 inches that way. And this will be our fold for where we sew for the handle on the top of the bag. I transferred the marks for where we start and stop sewing to the top so I could more easily see them. And yeah, we're gonna sew right down this and do some reversing at the beginning, and then at the end on the other side. So this is our second side plate. The other one we already basted our lining to. This one we haven't basted the lining to yet, and we're going to staple this on. I just like to staple it somewhere in the middle along the height. And we're going to staple it in place on this side. And then we'll turn it around, get them as even as possible, and staple it in place on this side as well. So this pouch has a handle on it, but the other one does not. So we're going to sew zigzag stitches across this, 3 of them, and I'm going to reduce my stitch length just so I get a stronger stitch. And we're going to do some reversing at the beginning. So across it, and then we're just going to reverse back and forth across it a few times to make sure that this handle stays in place. And then I'm going to move over about a 1/2 inch and do it again. And I'm going to do this 3 times and then do the same thing to the other side. So now we're going to take the lining panel and we're going to baste around the perimeter of the lining panel. For the first panel, we basted the fabric on the back side and then stuck this to it, but it's actually easier when you have the handle to stick this panel to the lining. This panel onto it so that all the edges match up. So now we're going to take this panel and fold it in half and then cut a triangle out of the bottom edge, and we will baste around the perimeter on this top side.
For the opposite end that doesn't have the webbing handle, we'll do the same thing. Fold it in half, notch it, then put basting tape around it.
And then I'm going to put basting tape around the perimeter of this panel.
Our end pouches have a zippered boxing around the perimeter. We're going to work on that now.
Which is 13A, 14A, and 13B and 14B. And we're going to take the patterning material off of the lining fabric, so 13B and 14B. And then we're going to flip 13A and 14A over and baste the lining fabrics on just like we did with these panels. And then I'll show you what's next. We are not removing the patterning material here because we are going to actually use our lines to notch through both layers of material. So we remove the transfer paper off this one, and we are going to baste this down evenly, just like we did with the other panels, all the way down the length. So now we're going to flip the panel over, and we're going to put little triangles, no deeper than, I'm going to put them just very slightly and maybe a 1/4 inch into the panel on both sides over here as well. Now we have 15A, 15B, and 16A and 16B, and I've actually repinned all of them so that the pin doesn't interfere with the center line, because we're going to be cutting each one of these in half down this black line that's on the pattern. So we're just going to cut them all out, and then I'll show you what's next. So now that our panels are cut in half, we're going to remove the pins, and then we're going to mark 3/4 inches up from the from one of the long sides. And this will be our fold-to line for our hem. And we'll do the exact same thing with the Cordura. We want to mark on the back side of the Cordura, so the urethane side facing up, 3/4 inch. All the way across. Okay. And then we're going to put basting tape running down the side and fold it to that line we just struck, all the way down the length. And we'll repeat this process with all of the linings and all of the Cordura for those four pieces that we split into 8. And then we're going to take the Sailrite canvas patterning ruler, and we're going to press down on our basting tape to make sure it sticks in place. And also that helps make it a little straighter too. Okay, and we'll keep going. So now we have all of our hems basted in place, and we're going to run basting tape right next to the edge of the zipper, but this is the wrong side facing, or the side without the teeth is facing up towards us because we are using reverse sliders. And we're going to run it down this side as well. Okay, so we want to make sure that our basting tape is right on top of this edge or even a little over it. We need to baste the flange of our fabric about 1/16 of an inch past this in order to cover the basting tape and make sure it doesn't show on the top of the zipper. So we're going to peel this off, and we'll baste 1/16 of an inch, which is just barely past where we stuck our basting tape, all the way down the length on both sides. So now that it's basted in place, we're going to trim off the end of the zipper. And we're going to flip the zipper over and do the exact same thing with the lining fabrics. But we want these linings to be a little bit deeper than the Cordura, so that we know we're going to sew through it. So I'm actually going to put it in an extra 1/16 of an inch or so, because if you miss it, it will be noticeable on the inside of the bag. But if you put it in, you will never miss it, and the stitch really isn't that noticeable to begin with because it's hard to see it on the inside of the pocket. Okay, we're gonna sew this zipper plaque, and we want this stitch to be as close as we can to this edge so our basting tape doesn't show. And obviously I'm sewing slowly here. And if you have the worker bee, it's not a bad idea to turn it all the way down here because this is a very important stitch and you want to go as slow as possible. Once we finish this side, we'll repeat the same process on the other side of the zipper, getting it as close to the edge as we can. Okay, so our 2 zipper panels are now complete and they look good. So we're going to trim these zippers so that they're flush with the ends. The pockets on the end of the bag are exactly the same. So we're going to actually set these 2 pieces aside and then we will make one whole side of the bag and then you'll know how to make the other side because it's the exact same process. Okay, now we're going to pull the zipper teeth apart a little bit and we're going to install a slider on this end. We want to make sure that they're even. You see the fabric is even on this, so we're good. And then we're going to flip it around to the other end, pull the zipper apart over here. Okay, and then I'm just going to push both sliders into the center. We're going to grab our boxing. So we're going to put double-sided tape right here, and then baste our boxing down with outside surfaces facing one another right here, just like that. And we're going to do the same thing over here on the other side. And then we'll take it over to the sewing machine and we'll sew it. And then we'll bind it as well. And now we're going to bind these 2 ends with our cut binding, so the Cordura binding. And then we'll show you what's next. Now we're going to put a top stitch in both of the edges we just bound on our boxing. So we'll just put it in the sewing machine, use the outside of this foot as our guide with the needle in the center position, and just go right across here, a little top stitch. And I'll do the same thing on this side over here.
Sewing the zippered boxing to the plates that we did earlier is next.
So now we have our band, our boxing, and you see there's our center notch for the bottom, and we'll baste that center notch directly on top of the notch we made on this panel and work our way around the perimeter. When we come to the corner, we'll cut a notch 3/8 inch from our corner into it and then make a turn using that notch. Keep basting around, and when we get up to the top of the rounded area, we're going to cut little notches into the material so it takes this shape better. So see how the little notches are splaying outward, and it takes that corner nice and easy. It's exactly what we want. Now the panels are designed to match up perfectly, but if it is off a little bit, you can shrink up or stretch one of the panels to make up for the extra distance. Now we're going to take it over to the sewing machine and sew a 3/8 inch with our 3/8 inch seam allowance all the way around the perimeter.
We're going to go to the one with the webbing handle and show that one as an example of this.
Okay, so we're going to put the magnetic sewing guide on. So we have a 3/8 inch seam allowance, which means it's right up against the side of the foot. We're sewing a straight stitch here with our foot in the center position. And I'm just going to start here at the middle and the top. Do a little bit of reversing when I start. Sew around the perimeter. To the corner, I'm going to, first of all, I need to make sure it's all basted down. And then I'm just going to slowly turn with that corner, keeping it at the 3/8 inch all the way around the corner. We don't want to put any wrinkles in it. So see, I think I'm about to create a wrinkle, so I'll lift it. I have my needle buried. I'll move the wrinkle out of the way, lower my foot, continue to sew. I'll sew up to this corner, and I'm going to stop right on where my slit is in the corner. So if I have to use the reverse lever, see right there, I use the reverse lever so I can position my stitch, bury the needle with it coming up a little bit, Turn the material, push this back, lower the foot, continue to sew. And we'll sew all the way around to the top and show you what's next.
We'll repeat this process for the opposite side panel without the webbing handle.
Now we're going to bind around the top, around the outside of this pocket, and we're going to bind the curved outside portion first and then the bottom. So we'll just feed it into our binder, just like we have with all the pieces in the past. We're doing a straight stitch. And just go around the perimeter.
This is the opposite panel without the webbing handle. The process for the one with the webbing handle is done exactly in the same way to bind the edge of it.
Okay, now we're going to trim it off right here. Trim our corners flush, the bottom down here on both ends. Get rid of all of our trailers. And then I'm going to sew a second piece of binding on this bottom edge.
Let's move on. Now we'll be working on the lining, which has a pocket on the inside of the end pouches.
So we're going to take panels 17A and 17B, and this is a pocket that goes on the inside of the lining. So I'm just going to mark right on those black marks we have plotted on there on both sides. And I'm also going to mark these lines here at the bottom. Now we'll take the clear acrylic ruler, place it on top of those marks, hold it down, and mark all the way across. Okay, take the basting tape. We put basting tape across this top edge. We're going to peel it off, baste it, and then put another thing of basting tape on it and create a double hem. We're going to take our pencil and transfer this line over to the other side of the fabric. So make sure you're looking to see where it is. Mark it over there. Same with this one over here. Okay, and then we'll flip our panel over and we will push this mark out so that it lands right on top of the outside corner. And you should have a fold like that, and it's about a 1/2 inch. Okay, and now I'm going to pin this fold in place with a pin. Okay, and I don't need to pin it too strongly. I just want it to stay in place, so I'll just stick the pin through like that. And I'll do the same thing over here to this corner. Okay, we're over here at the sewing machine, and we're going to sew these pleats down. So I'm actually just going to pinch this one with my fingers, remove the pin, hold it down with my finger, and then this is just a tacking stitch. So I'm just tacking this pleat down. So I'm sewing it really close to the outside edge. Just do a little bit of forward and reverse over it, and it's in place. And I'll do the same thing with the one over here on this end. Now we're going to come back here up to the top edge, and we're going to just sew with the outside of this hem along the outside of the inside foot, needles in the center position. And I'll do a little bit of reversing here at the beginning. You don't have to, because it is going to get sewn in again, and then just sew across. So we'll take this panel and we'll run basting tape across this bottom edge. And then break it, and we're going to also run it up this side. And the side's not going to be straight, so you are going to have to roll it around this like curved edge where the pleat is. And this pleat gives us a full pocket, so it's really nice to put pleats in pockets. Okay, now we'll take panel 17B. Now we're going to baste it. We'll baste the bottom edge first, and it won't always go all the way to the outside, so you don't have to worry about it if it's a little short of the corners. The pleats are going to pull it in, and it's also going to be sewn in. And now I'm going to baste up the sides with the sides even on both sides. And as you can see, it's a nice big pocket. Now we're going to strike a line that's 6 inches from this outside edge and perpendicular with the bottom edge for a center pocket. This will divide it into 2. You could put 3 pockets in here if you want, but I prefer just to have 1 so that they're bigger. And now we'll take it over the machine and we're going to sew down the center of this panel. We will do some reversing at the top because this could be a point of stress. So I'm going to reverse a couple times and then just sew straight down it. And do a little bit of reversing at the bottom. Okay. Now we're going to sew a tacking stitch around this pocket So we'll just sew it really close to this outside edge here. Doesn't have to be perfect because it's just a stitch to hold it in place. Just gonna go one stitch in reverse and sew close to this outside edge around the perimeter. And it doesn't matter if I miss the fabric down here at the bottom, like it's just a tacking stitch. Bury the needle, lift the foot, rotate the fabric, lower the foot, and sew. So we have our side panel with the handle on it. The other one will not have a handle, but they're the exact same, and the process is the exact same. So now we're going to take this and we're going to flip it so that the right outside surface is facing out. Push out all the corners. Then we'll take our lining panel with the pockets on it, with the pockets facing up, and we'll apply basting tape all the way around the perimeter of this panel. I'm just going to fold the pocket in half and cut a little triangle into the bottom so we know where the center is. And then I'm going to take our top panel that we just turned right side out, and I'm going to match up that center triangle with the triangle on this. And I've already pre-cut the triangle in the corner on this one, so I don't have to cut it, but you would want to cut a triangle or a slit into the corner so you can eat more easily around it. And I did the same thing up here at the top. I have all of my little cuts for the curve. I'll just work my way around the whole panel. If you do get a few tiny wrinkles like this one, you can always just peel up the basting tape and spread it out a little bit. This is sewing, so things don't always go perfectly, even though the panels are designed to match perfectly. So we'll just spread the wrinkles out a little bit, and then we'll take it to the machine. I have my needle positioned to the right, and I'm going to sew a tacking stitch around the perimeter of this panel. So I'm going to sew right up against this edge. It doesn't really matter if you miss on certain areas. You do want to try to get it all tacked down, but it's not a big deal as long as it's inside of your seam allowance. You don't want this to show when you're finishing the bag. Okay, and when we come up to the corner, we're just going to roll the fabric around.
This tacking stitch is meant only to hold the assembly together. When we take it to the bag and sew it onto the bag, it'll be secured well.
One more stitch. Then we can just roll the fabric this way a little bit. Put our foot down, continue to sew. And we'll do this all the way around the perimeter.
Find 18A and 18B next and repeat this procedure for the opposite end pouch. And in this chapter, we'll be sewing the end pouches to the main body.
So both of our sides are finished with the lining fabrics tacked to them. And this is the main body, and we're going to turn the main body so that it is inside out. So we need to be careful here to make sure that the side with the handle goes on the top, and the top is the side with the two large buckles that are closer together. So we're going to start with that side. We'll tilt this bag up. Remember, large buckles at the top. And we're going to take our piece with the handle on it, because the handle goes with at the top of the bag. And the zipper on this will go facing towards the top, so up here at the top. And I'm going to take it, and you see how the bottom edge here is straight? So that's the bottom of the bag. And I'm going to even it out so that if you see these seams, there's a seam on this side and a seam on this side. I'm going to space it so that it's perfectly even between the two. You could also put a mark at the bottom and just follow that, but I find this to be just as easy, so I'm going to move it over so it's perfectly even between the two. And then I'll take my stapler and I will staple the panels together all the way across this bottom edge first. And then I'll check it one more time to make sure that it is even between the two outside edges, and it is. So you see this stitch here on the bottom? It's on both sides. The outside of the bottom of this panel, the lining panel, should land right on top of the stitch, and you know that it's centered. Okay, and now we're going to continue to work our way around the perimeter, just putting the sides together and stapling it in place. And we will want to tuck these buckles in to make sure they're on the inside of the bag. And I'm not going to staple through the webbing on the buckles because it is a lot of thickness and there's no way the staples will stay. So I'll avoid that area. So we stapled it everywhere. So there's just if you look at the corner, there's just staples all over. There's a few less up here where the webbing is because it's too thick to staple through, but that should be easy to sew. So now we're ready to sew with the sewing machine. We have the magnetic sewing guide on, needles in the center position, and we're gonna sew a 3/8 inch stitch all the way around the perimeter of this. So we'll just put it in there, put our foot down, and start sewing. And I am gonna do a little bit of reversing here at the beginning, just a little bit. So up to the corner. And when we get to the corner, I'm gonna sew until I get to the point where when I turn the fabric, it's gonna be at 3/8 inch. So I'm gonna use the reverse lever to position my stitch. And then I'm gonna lift my foot and I'm gonna roll the entire project around and reposition it so that it's at 3/8 inch again. And then I'll continue to sew. Looks like we hit one of the staples. Now we're gonna do repeat the same process over on this end, and it's the exact same process, so we won't show that. So we'll staple it and then sew it 3/8 inch all the way around the perimeter. So we cut 2 strips of our Cordura material that are 1.5 inches wide and at least 42 inches long. It's easier if you cut extra. And now we're gonna mark a line directly down the center of both of these, and this will be the line we use to line up the binding when we fold it around this edge, because this edge is so thick you can't use 1-inch binding, so we're going to make our own and then baste it on. We put basting tape down both sides, but it's not a bad idea to take it to the edge of the table and crease it there in the center just so it has a natural fold to it. So I'll do that all the way down the length of both pieces. We're removing the staples from the bag and then we're gonna put the binding on. So we'll remove the staples from both sides first. We peeled off our transfer paper and we're gonna put our binding on all the way around the perimeter. And you can use the line and put it right on top of the raw edge of your fabric, and that'll actually make it perfectly even on both sides. And we're gonna continue to move around the perimeter, doing this exact same thing. And we did start at the top up here because when you open the bag, you're more likely to actually see the bottom of the fabric than you are to the top, because this is right up here next to the zipper. Okay, and then this is a 90-degree turn, so there'll probably be a little fold you have to put into it, but not a problem. And I'm gonna keep looking at that white line and basting it on. We're getting to the end here, so I'm gonna cut it so that there's about 1 inch overlap crossed, and then I will just baste so that they're on top of one another, and we'll take it over the machine and we'll sew. And we're not gonna do the other side yet. We're gonna do one side at a time, because if we do the other side, it's probably gonna come unbasted before we even sew it. So we're just gonna take this, we're at the sewing machine, and we're going to put our binding underneath. Just put our foot right in the center right there and sew around the perimeter, doing as best we can to stay in the center. And I will do a little reversing here. And then it's pretty much the same as sewing the side on, actually a little easier. And then we'll just keep sewing. So this side is now complete, and we're going to repeat the same process over here on the other side of the bag, and we won't show you that. And then we'll show you what's next.
We'll be making some awesome padded backpack straps next.
So now we're going to be working on the shoulder straps. We have 19A, 19B, which is our foam, 20A and 21A, 20B and 21B, and then 22 and 23. And the first thing we're going to do is take our 1 1/2 inch webbing and cut 2 7-inch pieces. And then we're going to take our 1 inch webbing and cut 2 pieces to 16 inches. So now we're going to take both of the male portions of our buckle, and we're not going to use the adjustment portion. We're actually just going to loop the webbing through like that on both of them. Now we're going to take our 1-inch webbing and overlap it about an inch into the 1.5-inch webbing and make sure it's perfectly centered. And then fold this piece over on top so that it's even. Take our stapler, so I'm going to hold it all together, and take our stapler and staple it in place. Then I'll just staple it in place. And then I'll repeat the same thing with this piece. Now we're just going to take both of these and do a tacking stitch. Right along this edge, we won't do any reversing because it's just a tacking stitch. So I'm just going to sew a few stitches. I'll actually just leave it in place and sew the next one as well. Then I'll take it to the table and I'll remove my staples. Now we'll take 20A, 21A, 22, and 23 and we'll remove all the patterns. So we'll flip over these two smaller pieces and put basting tape on both of the short ends, top and bottom, on both pieces. And I'll do this one next, but I'm gonna just show you how you do this one so you can repeat the process on the other one. I'll remove the basting tape, and then I'll just fold both ends over to approximately a 1/2 inch. And when we're done, we wanna make sure that they are equal. We are just gonna sew a stitch across this. It's like basically a top stitch or stitch on the hem. And I'm gonna do it with the outside of the center foot up against the edge, hold my trailers, do a tiny bit of reversing, and then just sew across it, and do the same thing with we'll do the same thing with this guy, the second one. Just put it in, keep sewing, and then we'll flip it around and do the same thing on the other side. So these are adjustable straps, and we're gonna feed our webbing through around this little loop at the end, and then fold it over so that it's 1.5 inches sticking out right there. It is important that the YKK is facing up, and this loops underneath. So you see it's facing up here, and we want this to loop under so that you won't see it. So we'll do a tacking stitch across this, just like we did over here, and then we'll show you what's next. So now that our tacking stitch is in place, we're gonna flip these over so that the undersides are facing up. The YKK will be facing the table. And we will put basting tape down the center. So now we have the two Cordura pieces with the right side, the outside fabric, facing up. And we're gonna remove our basting tape. And we're gonna baste this down so that it's perfectly centered with this buckle about 1/4 inch inside of the outside edge. And we'll just baste it all the way to the top, making sure it's centered. And then we're gonna do the exact same thing with this other buckle, and we wanna make sure that they're identical. So I'm gonna look at them very carefully, make sure it's centered, make sure they all land in the same spot, then baste it down. We're gonna put basting tape down both of the long sides of the small pieces we just hemmed on both pieces. And we're going to baste it down so that the top of the hem comes about 1/4 inch above that stitch. And we're going to do a zigzag here, not going outside the edges of the webbing, a zigzag here, not going outside the edges of the webbing, and we're going to do one in the middle right here, and then one right on top of this stitch down here at the bottom. And we'll do that on both of these panels. So we're going to sew this with a very short zigzag, so I'm going to reduce my stitch length in both forward and reverse so that it's very tight. And then we're also going to obviously sew it in zigzag, so I'll switch to zigzag. And remember, we're only sewing right on top of where the webbing is, not down the edges. So I'm actually going to put the outside of the inside foot on that upper edge, and that's where I'm going to sew. And I'll just sew across the webbing, doing a bunch of reversing as well. Hold my trailers, sew across, sew back across, back to forward, back across, One more time. And there you have it. So here's a look at our finished straps, and you can see there's a stitch here, 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 and here on both straps, and they're also even, so we made sure that we got them in the same spot. Now we have 20 and 21B, and I'm going to remove the top pin on both of these because we're going to actually cut it in half right across this line. Just like that on both pieces. Okay, and now I'll remove the patterning material. And I will apply basting tape to these top edges on both of them, and we'll create a 1/2-inch hem. And then I'm going to fold it over to approximately a 1/2 inch on each one. Okay, so now I'm going to put basting tape around the perimeter as close as possible to the edge. So right on top of that raw edge of our fabric. And I'll just return the corner. Okay, we have our basting tape around the perimeter of all of our panels, and we're going to peel off our transfer paper. And you will notice that there is no basting tape along the flat ends we cut. So all the cut lines are open. So we took our Cordura that we've already sewn with the webbing, and we have the wrong side facing up, and we're going to take one of the little guys and baste it down right here around the top, just like that. And then we'll take one of the big guys and baste it down even at the bottom. So you got to pay attention to this bottom edge to make sure it's perfectly even, and then baste it down. We'll do the same thing with this second strap right here. So this is actually an opening in the top, so we can put this foam in and give ourselves some padding for our shoulders. This is our prefabricated binding that comes with the kit, and we've kept the stitch length very short and in a zigzag, just like we had for sewing these webbing straps. And we're going to sew starting at this top edge all the way around the perimeter. So we want to make sure it's in the center so that we don't see the overlap when we're finished. And we will do a tiny bit of reversing here at the beginning, but we don't have to, we are going to sew over it again and do some more reversing later. So, okay, I'll do a little reversing, and then I'll just feed this into the binder, making sure I'm paying attention to the exiting point as I'm going around this corner. And you really got to feed it in there because this is a tight corner. And then I'll sew all the way around the perimeter and show you what we do at the end. I'm going to move this strap out of the way when I sew around this corner and just turn it as we go. And if you need to stop, make sure you bury your needle. Just got to make sure I get it all fed in there. And you can use a screwdriver if necessary. I don't think it's going to be necessary in this instance, but it can be helpful. Okay, we're coming up here on the last corner. I'm going to push this buckle back so you hopefully can get a better view. So around this last corner, and then when I come to this binding, I'm going to have to smash it in there real good because it's not going to want to go into the binder. I'm going to actually cut this trailer just so it doesn't stick out when I'm finished. And I'm going to keep feeding it in here around this corner. Looks like I'm getting caught a little bit. There we go. And now I'm pushing it in there super hard. Do some reversing. And we're going to pull it out. And we'll cut it here at the table. Cut it here, and then we'll take it to the table and use a hot knife to finish the end. So now we're back at the table. I'm going to trim this off with scissors as close as I can get it, and then touch the ends with a hot knife. And I want to be careful when I do this because you can burn the other binding. When it's on the bag, this strap will actually cover up that joint, so you really won't see it, but you still want it to look good. We're going to take our foam, one of our foam pieces, place it on top, and then we need to cut it so that it's just short of this hem. So I'll put my finger down where I, just underneath this hem, so that's the bottom of the hem, and then I'm going to trim this off right here. Okay, and then I'll remove the pattern material. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to feed it down into this pocket. And it's going to be tight because this is a small opening, but once you get it in there, you can use your screwdriver. So we have a really long screwdriver here, and use that to push it down to the bottom. So now that we have our foam in place, we're going to take it over to the sewing machine and do a straight stitch across the top of this pocket, and we will sew into our binding a little bit because it's black thread, so you won't see it. So I'm going to switch my machine back into straight stitch. And I am using the outside edge of the inside foot as my guide as I sew along this hem. Do a little reversing at the end, and there we go. So we've cut two 18-inch pieces of our 1-inch nylon webbing, and we're going to use the male portion of these buckles, and we want to make sure we feed it through the top side, so there is a top and a bottom. Bottom looks like that. Top has the YKK on it. Just feed it through, and we're going to just make a loop. We don't need to use the adjustability portion of this because we're using these sliders for the adjustability. And we're going to take it over to the machine and sew a zigzag stitch across this. And we do want to make sure that the raw edge is on the bottom. So we're going to sew the same short zigzag stitch we used on the rest of the webbing across this one. And we will do some reversing back and forth across it. So we'll go to one end, sew back. And we'll do this several times, and then we'll repeat the same process with the other one as well. There we go. So now that we've sewn both of our buckles, we're going to come back to the slide adjuster, and we're going to feed it up from underneath through the back slot, and then back down through the front. Just like that. Remember, when you're feeding the webbing into the slide adjuster, you want to make sure that the raw edge of the webbing is on the bottom for this buckle. That way it doesn't show on the top. Okay, and this will give us, when it's pulled on, you'll see that it won't release. And now we're going to take this and we're going to fold it over 2 times like that, and then just sew a straight stitch across it, and we'll repeat the same thing with this one. And this straight stitch will be right down the middle of our webbing. So I'm going to hold my trailers, sew across it, do some reversing, and sew across it one more time. And repeat this with the other one.
And now the final step, installing snaps on the handle wrap.
So now that our bag is complete, our straps are complete, and we're going to turn this right side out. So I'm going to undo the zippers, going both directions all the way. And then I'll take the inside of the bag and I will pull it through. And this can be a little bit tedious just because there's so much there, but this is one of the easier bags I've worked with, so it's not too bad. We're also going to want to open the outside pockets up and put our hand in there and push it all out so everything's just nice and full looking. So we're going to take our handle and we're going to flip it over so that the stitch side is facing up, the webbing is facing down, and we've already put the marks there, but we're going to put a mark 1 inch from each side of the handle. So 1 inch there, 1 inch from this direction, and then obviously the same thing over here. 1 inch here, and 1 inch here. So we're using an 1/8 inch Sailrite drill hole cutter from the drill hole cutter set, and we'll put it into our drill, and then we'll drill holes right on those dots that we marked just a minute ago. This drill hole cutter makes it super easy. Just put it down, and you're done. So now we need to actually flip this over because we want to put the button on the outside, which is this side for us. The outside is the side opposite the webbing. So then we're going to take our tool, we'll put our button on top, push it through the hole like that, and then we will take our socket, place that on top, and then take our installation tool, put it on the center of our button. If you have a better snap tool, I would definitely recommend using it. We're using the cheapest tool just because it's more affordable. And then we're going to give it a few blows with the hammer. And there you go. And we'll do the same thing with this button on this side. So we're going to take some chalk and mark the top of our buttons with the chalk. Our sockets, sorry, not buttons. And then we're going to take the other side of the handle, put it in the center, fold this side over, and then fold this side over and press it down to mark where we need to install our studs. There you go. So we have our marks here, and they look a little off-centered, so I'm going to actually center them up myself. I'm going to put this one about right there. And then we're just going to wipe it off. Chalk comes off of this fabric easily, so we'll just wipe off all of our chalk marks. The rag's a little wet, so that helps a lot. So it's very important that we get the stud on the proper side. So this is the side with the buttons, and we're going to be folding this in and then snapping it over the top. That means that the stud needs to go on this side. So I've flipped over my tool. This is the side you install a button with, and this is the side you install an eyelet with. And I will put my eyelet on here and the stud on top. Okay, same process. There we go, and we'll install the other one in the exact same manner. So with our straps installed, we'll put the second part of the handle in there, fold over the first part, and then snap it into place. There you go. For the last step, we're going to install our pull tabs. These are called slim zipper pull tabs, and you'll have enough in the kit for every single zipper, but I only like to put them on the outside, and you put them on just like an airplane tag. So you put the loop through, and then you just push the end through the loop, and you just do that on every single zipper slider.
The materials to build each one of these bags are included in the kit. You'll find a full list of materials and the tools that we use to build this bag in the description below. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. Also subscribe and click the bell to be notified of new videos when they become available on the Sailrite DIY channel. I'm Eric Grant, and from all of us here at Sailrite, thanks for watching.